Hi, my name is Renee Rizzo. Today I'll be introducing you to resources to teach the concept of parallel and perpendicular lines to high school students in alternate assessment settings. This video will be teacher facing and will guide you through a Google Slides presentation explaining the reasoning behind my planning of the lesson in this manner, a video found on both YouTube and getepic.com which demonstrates the topic in an accessible way for visual and auditory learners, differentiated Google Forms I created for student assessment, and ideas for how to use Flipgrid to deliver instruction or to invite student participation in remote and blended learning settings. This lesson builds on a prior lesson about parallel lines. When introducing a new topic, it is always a good idea to connect it to previously taught topic, so students are more likely to understand how the new information is relevant and builds upon information they already know. Focus question: how do we identify and describe parallel and perpendicular lines? Relevant next-gen standard: determine if lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither based on slopes. Related NICE DLM essential element: know the attributes of perpendicular lines, parallel lines, and line segments, angles, and circles. Linkage levels to this DLM essential element. Initial precursor: recognize same, recognize different, and recognize attribute values. Distal precursor: recognize point, recognize ray, recognize angle, and recognize right angles. Proximal precursor: recognize circles, recognize parallel lines and line segments, and recognize perpendicular lines and line segments. Target: define circle, explain angle, explain perpendicular lines and line segments, and explain parallel lines and line segments. Successor: explain straight angles, explain adjacent angles, and explain vertical angles. Vocabulary for this lesson: parallel: straight lines that remain the same distance from one another and never meet. Perpendicular lines: lines that are at right angles to each other. And slope: the steepness of a line or its rise over run. When introducing vocabulary to students, I always include visuals to make it easier to comprehend. For our kinesthetic learners, students and staff can make parallel or perpendicular lines using their bodies. It does not have to be as complicated as what this woman is doing. You can simply make parallel lines with your arms or perpendicular with your arms. Tactile learners can make or find parallel and perpendicular lines using common household or classroom objects such as pencils, pens, toothbrushes, toothpicks, glue sticks, whatever you can think of, or they can find fabric with stripes or with plaid on them. Something with plaid on it would contain both parallel and perpendicular lines. For visual and auditory learners, the following video clip was found for free on YouTube and is also on getepic.com, a website on which teachers can make free accounts and have access to various books, audiobook, and video resources.
You'll find lines that are perpendicular on a rectangle's perimeter. Or let's break it down even simpler. They make right angles in particular.
Parallel lines never meet. Intersecting lines make V's. Perpendicular lines meet at 90 degrees. Put your hands in the air with me. Parallel, intersecting, perpendicular, they're rectangular.
So the video goes on with that familiar song and dance of the robot, and they go into the definitions and examples of intersecting and parallel lines as well. So it's very engaging not only for our visual and auditory learners, but it can also be engaging for our kinesthetic learners who could dance around with the moves of the robot in the video. So the next thing I want to show you is the differentiated Google Forms I created for student assessment. So for level 1, It would be to identify parallel lines by selecting a picture, and then identify perpendicular lines by selecting a picture. For level 2, students can identify the parallel lines by selecting and then justify. How do you know the lines you selected are parallel? Because they cross each other, because they are two-dimensional, or because they are the same distance apart at every point and will never cross each other. Identify the perpendicular lines with picture choices. Then justify. How do you know the lines you selected are perpendicular? Because they meet each other at a 90-degree angle, because they will never touch or meet each other, or because they are squiggly lines. Which household items contain parallel lines? Apples, balloons, shells. And I purposefully included this image of shells from my household because I taught using this image in my lesson about parallel lines previously. So I'm hoping this will jog students' memories and help them build that connection. Which household item contains perpendicular lines? Sugar, a dog crate, or plants? And the answer is obviously the dog crate. So for level 3, it becomes more open-ended. Students first identify the parallel lines and then answer. How do you know the lines you selected are parallel to each other, and explain? What are some items in your home or your classroom that contain parallel lines? Then identify the perpendicular lines. How do you know the lines you selected are perpendicular to each other, and explain? And what are some items in your home or your classroom that contain parallel and perpendicular lines? So these are just 3 examples of how you can differentiate assessments for students based on their needs, and increase the rigor and the complexity of the questions that you are asking across the 3 levels, even though you're addressing the same subject matter. So now I want to show you something in Flipgrid. So Flipgrid is a tool that really lends itself to teaching visual topics because multimedia can be incorporated into videos. So as you can see here, I used text to type out parallel lines and perpendicular lines. I used the ink tool to draw parallel and perpendicular lines. I found stickers within Flipgrid of parallel and perpendicular lines, which just so happened to be an equal sign and a plus sign. And I also was able to upload photos from my computer of parallel and perpendicular lines in my household in the form of horizontal blinds and a dog crate. So there are many different directions you can go using Flipgrid, and students can even record their own responses to questions about parallel and perpendicular lines in video form using multimedia. So just to quickly recap what we went over today, we went through a Google Slides presentation in which I explained my reasoning for planning the lesson in this way. We went over a YouTube/GetEpic video that I found, which is great for our visual and auditory learners. We went over 3 differentiated Google Forms that I created for assessment, and we went over ideas for how to use Flipgrid to teach this lesson. Thank you for joining me.